So this is a Telecaster bridge position pickup, plugged straight into like a mid-80s Rose Morris Vox AC30. You can't see it, but it's back there behind that super reverb, sitting on a bench. The cabinet that I've got mic'd up is the cabinet from that amp, but the head is sitting over there, and I'm working on it. The normal channel either has a bad volume pot or some kind of poor connection. So, but while I'm celebrating that direct in sound, actually what I want to talk about today are my pedal boards. I love recording just a good guitar into a good amp, with a nice microphone, and getting a good tone out of it. This is a really nice sound. It's really touch sensitive. I mean, full volume sound is very, pretty chimey and all that. It's not really that same 60s sound of a AC30 from those days. It has a solid state rectifier, and it was built pretty cheaply at the time. This amplifier has a little bit of a interesting story. I bought it from Daniel Lanois sometime in the early 2000s. I think that he had this at his Kingsway studio, and then when he moved from there, it ended up in his Oxnard place that he had for a while, and then finally at his house, and that's when I bought it. I bought a bunch of stuff from him, a couple of Wurlitzers and that amp and a microphone. Anyway, when I bought it, I'll put some pictures in this video, but when I bought it, it was non-operative, and it had a hole burned literally in the circuit board. I think I fixed it with like maybe $2 worth of parts. I did have to get in there and kind of grind out some burned up circuit board, but I think like part of the diode network had failed, and it caused some kind of resistor to overheat, and it fried everything. But I fixed it, and I gigged with that amp for years after that, and I used to play it with this Junior. Pretty nice combination, and that's really where I learned how to use a tone control on an amp. Here, I'll let you hear that Junior. So this Junior is this Junior is a really, really great knockoff built by Steve Stearns, who works in the custom shop over at Fender. And I think this was like really not long after he'd been working there. He built about a half a dozen of these, and I got one of them. I think it's like a 56 Junior copy. I don't know if that's different than a 57 or not. I've got a real 57 over there, but this one's a little more of a daily driver than the other. But it's a cool guitar, and I played this for a while, and I really got to know how to use the tone control on a guitar and the volume knobs to adjust the tone to get, more. Just to clean things up. Anyway, I don't want to get off too far on this. This is just a little tangent. What I want to talk about are my adventures in pedal boards, which have not been very expansive. So I did a gig with Greg Martin, who's a guitar player in the Kentucky Headhunters. It was like a charity event, and my band was hosting, and he came and sat in with us for a set as a special guest. And I stood next to him, and he had like this 50-watt small box Marshall on top of a Fender 212 cabinet, which I thought, oh my God, he's mixing up Fenders and Marshalls. What kind of heathen is this man? And then he started playing guitar, and it sounded exactly in the 80s and 90s, when samples in music worked a little bit differently, people would just use a flat out sample. Would barely change it at all. So you could recognize like what Led Zeppelin song it came from or what James Brown song it came from. It was totally obvious. Now they mess with them a little bit more. But as this guy was playing guitar, Greg Martin, it sounded like somebody was just pushing a button and a Duane Allman sample would come out because his slide licks were just impeccably, perfectly played. And he had a flame top 50s Les Paul that was unbelievable. At least that thing is a flame top. It's been a long time. It's a famous guitar. You can look it up. And that was a real realignment in my life, and I basically abandoned any kind of sophisticated guitar setup and started buying only old stuff and doing it that way. So I ended up in Los Angeles from the Louisville, Kentucky area, and I needed a little bit more of a I needed like a pedalboard rig more than I needed some kind of big rack thing. But I still kind of aspired to having like this mixture of vintage gear and some kind of modern control because I was used to that. So a few things happened in my life there. I wanted to have like a cleaner sound, but these vintage amps and everything. So I built this pedalboard that I still use today. And I built this in the 1990s. And it's just a piece of plywood. It's 2 layers. It's got a 2x4 on the that second layer. It's got some holes drilled through it where I could plug into some pedals that got plugged in on the back. But as you can see there, here, let me turn it over. It has pedals, and then over here where my thumb is, there's a power supply for it, which as this whole location here on the side has evolved. But you can see I got a MXR micro amp. It goes into the overdrive there. That what do you call that? A Maxon TS808 type thing. And then it jumps up and goes into the DD5, and then into the tremolo pan pedal. That tremolo pan pedal, I've had that since like probably 1993 or 94. Had that a long time. Everything on this board has been here a long time. The MXR, or not the MXR, the Maxon is a replacement pedal that I used to have a tube screamer on there that broke, and I ended up with that. And then of course the Boss tuner. And then this guy over here is the tap tempo that's hooked up to the DD5. And then, over here is like a holy grail spring reverb pedal, because I was touring with a guy and using a Blues Junior, and the reverb tank kept breaking. So somewhere in like, where was I? It was in Oregon, maybe in Portland. I bought that at a music store used. It was pretty cheap. It got the job done. But that area that has, let me get this one more time. The area here that's got the reverb on it, and this Voodoo Labs thing, or whatever that is, the pedal power deal, that used to have this situation on it. So what is this thing? You can see over here, there's a bunch of little Canon plugs that would connect all my pedals, and then each one of these pairs of wires is an insert for an effects loop. And there's 8 effects loops here, but some of them also did something else. There were also just some like on-off switches. So it could either be these plugs, each one of these, let's see. So there's 8, oh man, where am I? There's 8, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then these 2 are both outputs, and that was a guitar input. And this DB25 connector was part of the switching system and the power delivery system for this computerized switcher that I built that ran off of MIDI. So each one of these guys is an insert, so it would go in and out a pedal. And then inside here are a bunch of relays that switched out individual loops. I'm gonna open this up in a minute and I'll show you how it works. And then there's this thing here. Oh man, this is really the most ridiculous thing I've ever built in my life. So what this is a very old ohm meter, and I gutted it, and at first it was just a power supply that that sent regulated power to all my pedals because I was obsessed with having controlled, non-rippling DC going to my pedals because it seemed like a thing to do. You know, I had more time than sense. And in Southern California, in the Pasadena area, which is where I am, near JPL, and you might have been hearing about them in the news lately. It's like there's JPL and Caltech, all in this area. And so there's a lot, during the 90s, there were a lot of shops that had surplus components and electronic components, and there was a place called Marvac Dow that's kind of famous. Eddie Van Halen got his Variac there. I got a Variac there years ago. I didn't know that Eddie bought his there, but my Variac came from there. And then there was another place called C&H Supply, and I'm pretty sure that I bought this at C&H Supply. And it was just this big mahogany ohm meter. Well, I turned it into a power supply. It's ridiculously heavy and large, but you know, it was the times. And then this printer cable carried the DC from this thing into, oh, you know what? Actually, I'm misremembering. The power supply used to come out of all these little contactors here. I drilled them all out. This is right. This is like a version 2.0 of this box. I drilled them all out, and then I had this snake that I made that went down to my pedal board that had all the power supplies in it. I mean, that's ridiculous. Who would do that? I was an idiot. But it looked cool. This would sit on top of my Super Reverb back there, like my little Hawaiian girl. And, you know, it has this nice little gem light on it. I'll plug it in so you can see it all. This will probably be kind of an edited video. And then one day I was walking my dog, not the one you see here. This was probably 1996. I was walking my dog and I realized that the switch outputs on a Tom Schultz MIDI Octopus could turn on and off relays if I wired it in the right direction. And I'd been trying to figure this out for a while. I was teaching myself electronics, and at first when I just hooked a relay up to it, or you know, like in line with a power supply, it didn't work. It wouldn't switch the relays. And then I realized there was just something I came up with this on this dog walk, and I ran back to my little place, my little back house, and I wired it up and it worked, and it blew my own mind. So what I ended up doing is taking my power supply box, putting this MIDI Octopus down in here, drilling out the back so that I could have my MIDI, where it is, my MIDI connections there, and stuff, or maybe it's right there. I can't remember. It's one of them. So this would sit on top of my amp. I had a ADA MP whatever MIDI foot controller, MC1 or something like that. I'm gonna get a tool and open this up, and I'll kind of show you what is inside here. And that printer cable that comes off this DB25 connector, it ended up delivering all my switching control voltages into that connector there, and also my power supplies for the pedals on my board. And then this would sit on the edge of the board where the Voodoo Labs thing is. It was here, replacing that. And it was pretty sharp. It worked real well. And then I could set the whole thing on top of my amp, and all I had on the floor was the pedal board. And if I wanted to make an adjustment to a pedal, I could just walk right over to the amp, and I didn't even have to lean down. I could just reach back and make an adjustment to my tremolo speed or how much overdrive I had, and it worked pretty well. This is probably my least robust piece of gear, and the thing that led to me stopping using it is I had been on tour with a band. We had just finished up like our last gigs in Colorado, and We were loading our stuff in the truck. This thing fell out of the truck and hit the deck. And it kind of, it broke some of the mounts inside because it's way too heavy. This box was an evolution of my practice to learn electronics by building power supplies. And so I built this really janky power supply on a piece of Radio Shack circuit board or something like that. And it just wasn't that robust. It did work for a long time. It was real reliable until it fell out of the back of a truck. So you can see here, I got all these power supplies in here. And each one of these, it looks like a bomb, doesn't it? My God, I'm glad I never tried to fly with this. This is all pre 9/11. So, how do I get this to be in focus? So each one of those red capacitors is part of a little circuit board that I built that has some regulation on it. Yeah, here's the regulators down here. That's what these guys are. See all those heat sinks with the T220 transistors on them? So I did regulate them. The real flaw here is that my main AC to AC transformers are held on with zip ties. And that's kind of what broke. And then on the inside here, in order to hook up the, I'm not gonna be able to show you that, I don't think. In order to be able to hook up the, if you see in the, you can't really, come on, grab it. There's part of an extension cord in there, and the what do you call it? It's just the very end of an extension cord to get an outlet, and the MIDI octopus is plugged into that. So that's where the MIDI octopus gets its power. And so anyway, this provided a bunch of regulated, I think they were all up to 1.5 amp supply lines for my pedals. And my pedals always sounded real clean. They didn't hum. It was great. And I'll show you the inside of this relay box. I think I built the relay box a little more robustly. So this thing here, you can see that little copper tab right there. I used to have these copper tabs that screwed into the side of the board, and that's what held it on. And I think I just cut it off in a rush to go do this gig that I had to do. In Monrovia, California or something. So this thing has all of the switching in it, and you know, like all the tricks that this could do all happen with the way this box was wired. And this one I'm not going to fully disassemble it. I don't know how much you're going to be able to really tell from it, but I fabricated this nice aluminum plate to hold the relays. And oh, come on now. There we go. When I was doing this stuff, I loved these project boxes. They were the coolest. Okay, so oh, this is neat. What a time. Wow, that looks like there's a power supply in there. Oh, you know what that is? Man, I was a nut. Okay, so let me get rid of these screws in a way that I don't lose them. All right, so this, the inside of my box. And over here is some little Craig Anderton buffer circuit that I built. God, I was an idiot. So I had this Craig Anderton buffer circuit. I wish I could get more light on it. I wonder how I could do that. There we go. You can kind of see it there at the end of the box. Oops. Come on now. Get it in focus. And then this row with all these colored wires on it, those are the relays. And they, that's the input and the output from each of this. Oh man, I'm all backwards. So this is like where my inputs were all set up. I don't even remember what the heck those resistors are doing, but they're doing something. It might have been to make the switching silent, and then you can see my little ground bar there for all my grounds, and then this aluminum plate here that the relays are on. I made that. I bought myself like a square D punch, and punched out those slots to hold each one of those relays. I had a couple of spare relays in there, so there's a spare there and a spare there. If anything ever happened, I could either switch some wiring around or whatever. And then over here on the side, these things were the DC outlets for each of the pedals. And I think that some of them, like, I'd set them up so that the distortion pedals were a little bit starved and they weren't running at a full 9 volts. They were running like 7.8 or whatever because they sagged a little more. I was an idiot. And then at one point I did build, it was really my only failed project like this. I built a remote wah pedal so that the wah could be in a box, the wah circuit could be in a box with the rest of my pedals on top of my amp. But I had an actuator on the floor that would be the wah pedal that I had gutted and just had the potentiometer in it that controlled the control voltage to make it wah. But it just never quite worked right because I was doing it. I don't really think I don't know if it was a linear. The taper of the pot I had was the same as the taper on a wah pedal. I really don't remember. It's been a long time ago. Anyway, after that thing fell out of the back of the truck, I had to get ready and do a gig, and I just ripped this thing off and got, like a little daisy chainer or whatever. Or I already had that Voodoo Labs thing, and I set it up and I just started running a regular pedal board with patch cables, and I haven't gone back. In fact, when I did it, because the pedals were too close together, if you notice between my... Oh, man, this is gonna be a disaster. If you notice between my delay and my tremolo pedal, that those plugs just have the backs screwed off of them because they're too close together. I could get them closer together with the things that I had built to run that relay board, and I've removed some of those insert cables and used them for other things in my studio because they were good cables. So what are you getting out of this video? You're not getting anything, except that sometimes building your own solutions opens other doors. The door that got opened for me, besides having this crazy guitar rig that could do a lot, is I went to somebody to have them build a box for me so I could maybe produce these things or at least build them more easily than having to do all that handwork. And he asked me about what, like, could it switch things other than audio signals? I'm like, it will switch anything, and he goes, so it could turn a motor on or off or a light or some kind of actuator. I'm like, yeah, sure. It'll turn on anything and turn it off. So he ended up calling me up, and I had this whole other part of my life where I was building, excuse me, Derb, where I was building electromechanical controllers for amusement parks, television commercials, props, haunted houses, carnival rides, amusement park features. I built multiple parade floats for Disneyland and for an amusement park in Seoul, South Korea. Way too much weird stuff. And so that was a whole sideline. And it was really that experience of like having to do all that large scale fabrication that sort of made me realize I could build a studio. And that's how I'm here right now. So that weird box that I just showed you and all those bits and pieces, just so I could change effects on my amp or switch amps without having to bend over and adjust something on the floor. Opened a chapter of my life that was pretty interesting, and it led to the next chapter and the next chapter. There were a lot of significant moments that happened around that time. Changed me forever. Okay. Thanks for watching my other video with the Tom Bukovac thing. He put out a video like the next day, and that video was called Pronounced Bukovac. And I had this terrible fear that in my video I repeatedly called him something else. It was just, you know, sometimes people get in the center of their own lives so much that they forget other lives, have other storylines going on in them. And I was afraid to watch my video to find out that I had mispronounced his name. I always thought I said it at least close. I think I pronounced it correctly. Maybe I could have screwed it up one time, but I was right in on it. Okay, I'll catch you later.